war has brought the Gaza Strip back to the early 1950s. The commissioner also stated that war on Gaza has destroyed the economy in the Strip, with the quality of life indicators declining by about 70 years. The International Monetary Fund expects global economic growth to ease slightly to 3.2% in 2024, maintaining the same pace into 2025. In its new World Economic Outlook report, the IMF also estimates the global inflation to drop to 5.8% this year and 4.3% by 2025. Moreover, the IMF warns of underlying shifts across regions and sectors. A chief economist hailed the decline in the inflation without a global recession as a key success, but long-term growth is expected to slow to 3.1% by 2029.
They are at inflation levels that are very similar.
Carlos Philip Jaramillo, the World Bank's regional vice president, announced that the bank will provide Argentina with over $2 billion in new loans for social security, education, transport, energy, and poverty alleviation. This announcement was made as Argentina's economy minister, Luis Caputo, attends the IMF World Bank Summit in Washington. Caputo, alongside the central bank chief Santiago Bauzili and finance secretary Pablo Quirno, is set to negotiate a new IMF program after exceeding targets in the current $44 billion agreement, which expires later this year. The World Bank announced that it will double its annual commitment to agricultural financing and businesses to $9 billion by 2030. And the World Bank President, Ajay Banga, noted that recent shifts in the agribusiness landscape, along with reforms at the World Bank, will facilitate this increase in funding. A key strategy involves tapping into climate finance resources, as agriculture, which is both vulnerable to climate risks and a significant contributor to emissions, currently receives only 4% of global climate finance. And in the United Kingdom, Goldman Sachs has predicted that interest rates will fall to 2.75% by next autumn, as the Bank of England is expected to reduce borrowing costs at each of its upcoming 9 meetings. Goldman Sachs economists, in their analysis of the long-term interest rate level required to meet the government's 2% inflation target, believe that markets are underestimating the extent of potential actions by the Bank of England's 9-member Monetary Policy Committee. The bank forecasts consecutive 0.25-point cuts, lowering its terminal bank rate estimate to 2.75% in November 2025, down from a previous forecast of 3% in September 2025. A Chinese policy think tank has proposed that Beijing issue 2 trillion yuan in special treasury bonds to establish a stock market stabilization fund. The Institute of Finance and Banking suggests that this fund could help stabilize the market by buying and selling blue chip stocks and exchange-traded funds. They also suggested increasing long-term capital investment to further stabilize the market, including raising the investment limits for insurance companies and the National Pension Fund. And South Africa's inflation dropped sharply in September, hitting its lowest level in more than 3 years. Statistics South Africa data showed that annual consumer price inflation slowed to a 3.8% from a 4.4% in August. The consumer price index rose an 0.1% month on month in September, the same as the month before. Goldman Sachs anticipates that oil prices will average $76 per barrel in 2025, citing a moderate crude surplus and ample spare capacity among major producers, along with easing concerns about potential disruptions to Iranian supply. The investment bank mentioned that while the medium-term risks within their $70 to $85 per barrel range are balanced, they lean slightly towards the downside. This is primarily due to the downward price pressures from high spare capacity and the possibility of broader trade tariffs, which outweigh potential price increases. Goldman also noted that prices could rise towards the end of the year as they believe Brent time spreads are underpricing physical tightness somewhat. And oil prices have fallen as U.S. crude oil inventories data has shown a notable rise in the volume of commercial crude oil stored by the U.S. companies. Brent crude futures dropped by 1.5% to $74.90 a barrel by 12:55 GMT. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures also shed a 1.53% to $70.64 a barrel. And gold prices pulled back after hitting a record high driven by escalating conflicts in the Middle East and growing uncertainty ahead of the upcoming U.S. elections. Spot gold was down by 0.5% to $2,735.46 per ounce as of 14:10 GMT. The U.S. gold futures went down by 0.4% at $2,749.90. And global stocks have shown a mixed performance as world leaders met in Russia for the 16th BRICS summit. And in the United States, the S&P 500 was an 0.4% lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down by 0.5%, and the Nasdaq Composite was an 0.8% lower as of 14:15 GMT. And in Europe, Germany's DAX and Britain's FTSE lost an 0.4%, and the CAC 40 in Paris lost an 0.8%. And in Asia, Japan's benchmark Nikkei 225 slipped an 0.8%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng added an 1.4%. The Shanghai Composite gained an 0.5%, and South Korea's Kospi was 1.1% higher.